When the Emperor himself retweets you, you kinda have to make a video explaining your thoughts of the past nearly 15 years. Hey, Chris Baker here, still on a Star Wars high after the rise of Skywalker. As someone who's been a Star Wars fan for as long as we've both been around, I absolutely loved it. And that's when the haters headed for the comments section. So let's talk about Revenge of the Sith! With a dash of Phantom Menace and Last Jedi, a sprinkling of A New Hope and Empire, and some Rise of Skywalker spoilers for dessert. You've been warned. For some reason, I guess because we're talking true Jedi bloodlines lately, the question of whether or not Anakin Skywalker was truly created simply by the Force is once again a hot topic. If that's what you believe, and based on a Twitter poll I did over the weekend, you pretty resoundingly do, that's cool. I'm not gonna fight you on that. But appropriate to Star Wars themes, I am going to offer a different point of view. Despite certain headlines you may have read recently, I still firmly believe that Palpatine not only grandfathered Rey, he was absolutely behind the creation of Anakin Skywalker. It kinda baffles me that people haven't thought this way since the space opera scene in Revenge of the Sith. I remember letting out an actual whoa when it happened the first time I saw the movie. And I've even seen a lot of folks online recently calling the idea dumb and without any backing. Oh, and of course there are also those who go along with the thinking, pointing to this dark side vision from Darth Vader number 25 by Charles Soule, which both Charles himself and Lucasfilm Story Group's Matt Martin have pointed out is not to be taken literally. What they didn't say though, which is pretty consistently being misconstrued, is that Palpatine definitively had no role in the creation of Anakin. For that, there's really only one place to look: said opera scene from Episode 3. Let's analyze it now, shall we?
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
Notice what they're looking at as Palpatine introduces the tragedy of Darth Plagueis? What does that look like to you? If you've had a certain special class in 5th grade, it should be pretty obvious. Okay, now listen closely to this.
Darth Plagueis was a dark lord of the Sith, so powerful and so wise, he could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life.
First, let's listen to those words at a literal level. There's this Darth Plagueis dude, and he knows how to create life with the Force. Pretty cut and dry. One more time, and pay attention to the emphasis.
He could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life.
Palpatine isn't saying he could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life in a factual manner. He's saying
to create life.
Why would Anakin care to the point that Palpatine would state things so dramatically? It's irrelevant to the thing that Anakin really wants to hear, the thing that'll eventually turn him because he's been having visions of Padme's death lately. And that, of course, delivered in a very similar, dramatically custom-tailored manner, is...
He had such a knowledge of the dark side, he could even keep the ones he cared about from dying.
All fine and good, and very relevant to the plot, yeah, but for the purpose of the point I'm making, I'm still not done with this line.
To create life.
Now, consider exactly who Palpatine is talking to deliver the line in that way. Yes, it's a guy who primarily wants to hear about keeping people from dying, but also probably the only being in the universe with a vested interest in knowing something about life being created. Again, Palpatine bringing up creating life is otherwise completely irrelevant to this conversation. But hey, anyway, at this point you might be thinking that Plagueis set the Force wheels in motion for Shmi Skywalker to have a son. Another perfectly valid takeaway if that's your thing, like it was for a fair number of you in my poll. But what the Chancellor says next, plus a few other things, is what seals the deal on Palpatine for me.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
That line should be pretty familiar to anyone who's seen the first 5 minutes of The Rise of Skywalker, which further goes to show how adept Palpatine is with these life powers too. But wait, it gets better.
What happened to him?
He became so powerful. The only thing he was afraid of was losing his power, which eventually, of course, he did. Unfortunately, he taught his apprentice everything he knew. He taught his apprentice everything he knew. He taught his apprentice everything he knew.
Plagueis taught his apprentice everything he knew. People seem to forget that. That would include how to keep people from dying, and how to create life. So at this point, it might still be kind of a coin flip between Plagueis and Palpatine for you.
What does your heart tell you?
Or maybe you still think it's just the Force, and that's fine, but isn't it kind of boring not to try to find some subtext here? Anyway, hopefully this gets you on Team Palpy. See, there's this thing, especially with the two Lucas Star Wars trilogies, that, well, here, you say it, George.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
Basically, you've got scenes in both trilogies that echo one another, be it the way things are shot or thematically. That extends to the sequel trilogy to a certain extent as well, if less elegantly, and when it comes to Bloodlines, all three trilogies have two particular linked scenes that rhyme: the fake out and the true reveal. Here we go.
A young Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of mine until he turned to evil, helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. He betrayed and murdered your father.
One never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No. I am your father.
They were nobody.
They were filthy junk traders who sold you off for drinking money. The dead in a pauper's grave in the Jakku Desert. You have no place in this story. You come from nothing. You're nothing.
Hey, Palpatine's grandfather.
The Force is unusually strong with him. That much is clear. Who was his father?
There was no father. I carried him, I gave birth, I raised him. I can't explain what happened.
It's a Sith legend. Darth Plagueis was a dark lord of the Sith, so powerful and so wise, he could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life. He taught his apprentice everything he knew.
One kind of touchy bit with this is that if you go with Palpatine putting things in motion, then it could be said that the Skywalkers, starting with Anakin, are Palpatine's too. Which kind of makes the Reylo moment a little icky, as we sort of have a case of kissing cousins on our hands. Or do we? Even though Palpatine set things in motion, at a biological level you're still talking midichlorians, not an actual person, as the father of Anakin and, hey, why not, raised father's mother. So it's not exactly Game of Thrones levels of ew here. I can go with it. Oh hey, and it's also worth noting that what set this whole video off was that Palpatine himself agrees with me. That being Sam Witwer, who's voiced him in video games and Star Wars Rebels. Not to mention Maul and actually being Starkiller in the Force Unleashed games. He brought the topic up on Christmas Day, a true gift to us all. And I hope I'm not putting words in his mouth here, but it seems his general message, like mine, is that Palpatine was the quote-unquote father of Anakin, but if you don't believe that, that's totally cool. The question remains unanswered, and it will likely never be answered. It's whatever you want it to be as a fan. And that's pretty rad. Also rad, he retweeted my response, which included a quote I remembered from a Rolling Stone interview with George Lucas in 2005. Now, there's a hint in the movie there was a Sith Lord who had the power to create life, but it's left unsaid. Is Anakin a product of a super Sith who influenced the midichlorians to create him? Or is he simply created by the midichlorians to bring forth a prophecy? Or was he created by the Force through the midichlorians? It's left up to the audience to decide. So yeah, whatever you want to be the case, that's the case. George said so. And for what it's worth, his volunteering of this information wasn't even directly responding to the question he was asked, so you know it's something that's on his mind as well. Obviously, he knows it was Palpatine. Hey, still here? Here's my pretty quick and simple explanation as to how Palpatine came back in The Rise of Skywalker. Something I haven't really heard anyone else say yet. It's admittedly a total retcon of Return of the Jedi, but I think it works. Actually, let's finish up that opera scene. There were still a couple of Plagueis lines that kind of relate to what I'm about to say. Here's where we left off.
He taught his apprentice everything he knew. Then his apprentice killed him in his sleep. It's ironic. He could save others from death, but not himself.
Plagueis dying in his sleep is actually kind of important. He didn't see his death coming, so he didn't have a chance to bring himself back once Palpatine killed him. Unlike Palpatine, who was thrown down a reactor shaft and at least had a little time to think things over. And speaking of that, what happens here? Even as a kid, this kind of threw me. Like, what actually happened to Palpatine here to make all that force wind pop up? I consulted the Marvel comic adaptation and the actual script, both of which basically say he exploded. Ask yourself, why would he explode? How does that make sense? Because of the core of the Death Star, I guess? Or maybe, just maybe, he exploded himself. That wind you see fly up from the shaft isn't just residual force lightning, it's Palpatine's essence itself. We can even retcon the next panel of the comic adaptation. Winds that suck the huge warrior in after his former master. You could interpret that as suggesting Palpatine is trying to get his revenge on Vader then and there, because Vader doesn't know anything about dark-side life powers. The thought doesn't even cross his mind that that's actually Palpatine's essence. But then Wedge and Lando blow up the station, and it goes flying to Endor's moon of Kef Bir, thanks Pablo Hidalgo, where Palpatine's essence spent a few years literally pulling itself together into a human form. The Wayfinder to Exegol was there the whole time, it being the Sith Master's throne room and all. Makes sense. Eventually, some of the Sith acolytes came along and collected whatever bodily mass he'd accumulated. And yeah, I guess they left the Wayfinder there and created the map knife for someone to Goonies together. Not my favorite part of the movie, I'll readily admit. Oh, and you know how everyone's all, how could he create all these Star Destroyers in that time? What if he didn't? What if he simply used his powers as Emperor to have a secret navy near Exegol, even when he was alive? What if the only new addition to these Star Destroyers, something only Poe points out by the way, so it's not even a sure thing, is the planet-killing superweapons? I buy that. As much as I buy a second, bigger Death Star being built in a mere 4 years after the much smaller one. The one that began construction 19 years before it was completed and blown away. Anyway, what do you guys think of all this? Whom do you see as Anakin's father? Got any interesting thoughts on how Palpatine actually came back? I'd love to hear it all. Just be nice. You're a jerk, you get deleted. It's that simple. I'll see you next time. May the Force be with you.